Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Cabral Concept. Great to have you here today on our Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday, where the topic is carbohydrates do not cause diabetes. And specifically, we're talking about type 2 diabetes. Now, this is going to be a very controversial show. There's no doubt about it. But remember, my commitment is to the truth, not necessarily to one side saying a high-fat diet is good, the other side saying a high-carbohydrate diet is good, one side saying a 40-30-30 diet is good. What we do on this show is we explore all of the science, all of the research. We put it into real-world terms and give you real-world takeaways. So the big one, and the reason why this show had to be done, is because there are so many people right now on a low carbohydrate diet, which in turn typically means a high fat carbohydrate diet, maybe something more like a keto-based diet. Although a lot of people are not following a keto diet, they believe that they are because they're keeping their fat high, but unfortunately their protein is high as well. And it's still causing spikes in blood sugar. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore this topic here today. We're going to look at it from a rational standpoint, which means that nobody has to be right, nobody has to be wrong. But I want to give you another side to the spectrum, because maybe right now you don't have type 2 diabetes, but maybe you're dealing with fasting glucose levels over a 100 if you're using a glucometer. And so when you're getting to that position in life, it means that your insulin and your cells are not working well together. So basically what that means is that when you eat carbohydrates, or again, even a high protein diet, it can increase your blood sugar levels. Now, what would normally happen is that the pancreas, so your pancreas is going to release insulin, and that insulin is then going to allow, or should open up the door. So think about it like this. We're talking about your liver. We're talking about a big part of it in your muscle as well. So when you have sugar floating around the bloodstream, what insulin does is it unlocks the door. So basically for your cells, it opens the door and says, okay, sugar, fill up this particular cell, because you want to fill up your glucose stores. So you fill up your liver, glycogen stores, and then you fill up your muscle as well. So that's filled. Again, it's not going to add body fat. It's going to fill up your natural reserves. Extra may turn to body fat. There's no doubt about it. But here's the big thing. So you might eat a normal carbohydrate meal. Maybe it's a high carbohydrate meal. Your body produces insulin to get that sugar out of the blood, but all of a sudden, nothing is working, or it's not working as well with someone that isn't quite at a type 2 diabetic level. And typically with type 2 diabetes, we're looking at fasting glucose above a 126 first thing in the morning. And we're typically looking at hemoglobin A1C, HbA1c being above a 5.7. So when you look at it from those terms, you might say, okay, you don't have type 2 diabetes yet, but if you're a 5.5, 5.6 in terms of your hemoglobin A1c, and you're really above a 95 or 100 at the most, then you're on the way, though, towards insulin resistance and potentially type 2 diabetes. That means when you eat a higher glycemic meal, so let's say a higher carbohydrate meal, and you raise blood sugar, you're not able to properly get that sugar into the bloodstream. But there's another part to it as well. You might eat a high protein meal that's higher in terms of what's called a glycemic load. So basically below 10 is lower glycemic load, 11 to 19, moderate, and then above a 20 is a higher glycemic load. And you can get that from even just eating a big steak, believe it or not. And again, I'm not saying that you can't eat meat in your diet. What I'm telling you right now is that we're simply going to go through all the different parameters. And hopefully by the end of the show, you can just make a more informed decision for what you decide to do. So we know now that proteins can break down to amino acids that can break down into glucose for the body as needed. We know that carbohydrates can break down from polysaccharides, so multi-chain sugars, disaccharides, 2, and then monosaccharides as well, 1. And so that's how your body's breaking them down, and it's able to, again, use that as energy. You only need so much energy, though, right? That's a big part of it. So let's start to look at, though, why I'm bringing you here today. Why not just do a low-carb diet if you're trying to lose weight and reduce blood sugar levels? And it's a great question. There's no doubt about it. And believe it or not, we use that as well in the beginning. So again, I'm not saying it's bad. What I'm saying is that it's short-sighted if that's your plan for the long term. And here's why. So again, a lot of people have been asking, I want more book recommendations, and I get it, and I read a lot of books, there's no doubt about it. But lately, I've just been reading hundreds of articles on one particular topic, trying to go really deep. And remember, whenever I believe one thing, I try to also read the other side to it. And that's essentially what we're looking at right here. So why is it that Harvard University, Joslin Clinic, and many other great universities and brilliant PhDs and researchers have said that there's no real correlation between a high carbohydrate diet and type 2 diabetes? It was interesting when I looked at that. And I said, okay, well, let's go a little bit further. And so what I realized was that, believe it or not, some of the longest lived people on this planet, which I've been studying the blue zones for 2 decades, they have a high carbohydrate diet. And I have a couple of research studies. I'm going to link them all up for you here today. So again, you can do further research yourself, which of course I always recommend. You can go to stephencabral.com/2028. So the first I always go back to, really it's one of the cornerstones, is that the Okinawan people, 68% of their diet, I'm quoting this off the top of my head, so I apologize if it's not exactly 68%. I will again link up all the studies for you. But 68% of the longest lived population, they basically ate what's called purple sweet potatoes. Now, again, as I'm sharing this with you, I understand that those are a little lower glycemic than a white potato, and I get it, but it's still carbohydrate, right? So we'll get to processed carbs in a minute. But what they found was 68% of their diet was just purple sweet potatoes. That doesn't include all the other forms of carbs in their diets, vegetables as well, that they, believe it or not, had low levels of blood sugar, normal to low levels, and type 2 diabetes was essentially a non-risk factor. And it was also interesting when they looked at another one of again, I would say healthy populations, and this was in Papua New Guinea. And what they found was that their diet was 90% carbohydrates from higher glycemic potatoes. And this is basically what they had access to. And what they found was that they didn't have access to modern medicine, and about 50% of the population smoked, which is a huge risk factor for type 2 diabetes. So you would certainly expect, we've got a 90% carbohydrate diet, it's higher glycemic, and they smoke. The type 2 diabetes must be rampant. And what they found was that they tested 14% of the whole population here that they were looking at. And their blood sugar was actually lower after one of their meals, which is very interesting, right? Because it's basically 90% carbs. And type 2 diabetes was not a risk factor. So much lower than the Western-based world we live in right now, which is the US, Western Europe, most of the world, of course. Interesting, though, when they took a lot of people, and let's say, because I'm going to get into this next diet as well. Why don't I get into that right now for you? And it's called, so we're just kind of looking at higher carbohydrate diets versus the normal, I would say, Western-based diet. Okay, so this is what it is. So there's a diet that they put people on that was 75% high in carbohydrates. So it was a high carbohydrate diet versus the normal, let's say, 60% carbohydrate diet. And what they found was that the higher carbohydrate diet actually led to better glucose tolerance. So meaning, like, when they had someone do a glucose tolerance test, which is a 72 grams or so of glucose, and that someone drinks a solution of, and they test their blood sugar an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours later. And the people that were on the 75% carbohydrate diet actually did better than those people on the normal 60% or so diet. And there's some interesting extrapolations that we can take from this, is that it seems that the body does better when it knows that carbohydrates are coming. It almost is like, think about it, it's almost like the pancreas and the body gets used to being able to absorb that those carbohydrates. However, I think there's something much deeper at play, because I actually, if you ask me the truth, I don't necessarily believe in that philosophy, but I can't tell you for sure that it's true or untrue. I don't think that we specifically know yet. What I believe, and this seems to be the bigger issue, is that when people are allowed to eat a higher fat, higher protein diet along with those carbohydrates, that's when we seem to run into an issue. Because I'm going to give you, and one more study to really make this come to fruition, is that this is again, I'm going to link all these up. 100 patients were put on what's known as the rice diet, which is mainly made up of white rice, fruit juice, and high carbohydrate, high glycemic index carbs. The total carbohydrate content was in the range of 95%. Okay, so 95% of their food was carbohydrates. Only 5% was fat and protein, which is wild. I mean, this is not a diet I recommend, but I'm just sharing this with you for the argument here, right? So the patients were observed for different amounts of times, but the average was about 2 years. Okay, so this is not a short study. It's a 2-year study. The average fasting glucose of these people, this is remarkable. I mean, this is unbelievable. The average fasting glucose from these people went from 202, so we're talking about type 2 diabetic, to 155. And their insulin went from 25 units to just 17. And they were put on white rice, fruit juice, and the other was high glycemic carbs. It's unbelievable, right? So if we believe the truth to be carbohydrates cause an increase in blood sugar, how is this happening? And I want to give you another study as well. So this study, and I'm going to quote it, 28 Asian Americans and 22 Caucasian Americans, all of whom were at risk for diabetes, were put in 2 groups. The group 1 ate the Western diet for 16 weeks, which is 4 months. The diet ended up being 50% carbs, 16% protein, and 34% fat. So it would be on the higher side of what people consider fat. Again, I know people are going to 70%. I get it. I understand that. 16% maybe be on the lower percent of protein. That's group 1. Okay. Group 2 was the same diet as above, but after 8 weeks, so after 50% of the diet, 50% of the research or the study was done, they switched to a, quote, traditional Asian diet, unquote, for another 8 weeks. The traditional Asian diet consisted of 70% carbs, 15% protein, 15% fat. This is really important. What did they switch? Okay, they really only switched 2 macros. Okay, they went from 50% carbs to 70% carbs, and they went from 34% fat to 15% fat. So the only thing that really changed, because 16 to 15% protein's a minuscule change. So what they did was they cut the fat by more than 50%. Okay, so here's what happened. By the end of those study, those that were following the traditional Asian diet had lost weight and improved insulin sensitivity, while the group on the Western diet gained weight and had worsened metabolic profile. Keep in mind, they all follow the same diet, the 50% carbs, 16 protein, 34% fat for the first 8 weeks. Then one group continued on, but then the other group veered off to the side. They added 20% more carbs to their diet, and they cut their fat by more than half, by about 60% or so. Interesting, right? Again, these are unbiased studies just looking at what's going on. Like, what is going on with blood sugar and carbohydrates? So what it comes down to is that there's a flawed theory. Again, I've got so much research on this, but I want to now get into what can we take from all of this, okay? Because there's literally so much that I could get into. I will do multiple shows. Remember, just comment below if you want me to do multiple shows in this. This is what it looks like. It looks like initially, because again, if we look at primates, look at the longest lived people that eat a diet predominantly high in carbohydrates, it doesn't seem to be an issue. The body is able to properly process carbohydrates. Here's the issue, and it seems to be the issue every single time, is that when we introduce processed carbohydrates, okay, processed carbohydrates, what's the difference, okay? The difference is, I don't have it with me today. I always typically have an apple. If you have an apple, you're looking at a moderate glycemic index fruit, okay? But if I made it into apple juice, what I've done is I've taken away the fiber, the enzymes, a lot of the phytonutrients that come with that apple, and I'm left with some of the vitamins, right? Some of the minerals, no doubt about it, and I'm left with just basically the fructose and glucose, the sugar, okay? That is going to be more of an extreme spike in blood sugar. But it's not just that, because believe it or not, when you look at the studies, and again, I'm going to link up the studies, but when you look at the studies, diabetics actually seem to do better with fruit in their diet, meaning like diabetics that eat fruit seem to have better insulin. They need less insulin, but they seem to do better with overall blood sugar ratios. And this is really interesting. I saw this first study, this was like 15 years ago, that people that simply added blueberry juice, believe it or not, blueberry juice, which was one of the reasons I came up with my Purple Crush smoothie, had better glucose tolerance. I mean, pretty amazing. And they're adding fruit, right? Wow, why is that? Well, they're getting all the nutrients with that fruit as well, because one of the risk factors is poor micronutrient status. The other is inflammation. We're going to talk about that with processed carbs in 1 second. We're looking at gut permeability, which leads to inflammation. Part of that gut permeability can come from glyphosate and other pesticides in the environment. We're looking at heavy metal-based issues causing inflammation in the body and also cellular damage as well. We're looking certainly at smoking as a risk factor, but again, we're taking that out of the equation for right now. And we're talking about overall stress, which I've talked about many, many times before, and how it essentially, without even carbohydrates, fat, or protein, can spike blood sugar too. But let's go to one more level, because it's not just the processed carbohydrates. I actually have seen multiple studies just show, like the white rice diet, right? The rice diet, showing that it's not even processed carbs, because remember, high glycemic, and you're talking about white rice. I mean, it's not processed, right? It's the white. It is right. It is processed, because you don't get necessarily white rice. You have to open it up and just get essentially the starch from the rice. So I would say that is fairly processed, but it still didn't cause diabetes, and it actually helped people with their glucose. So what is it? And then this is really where I had to go deep in the research. A lot of people will, probably this will get where it gets more controversial, is that there is a real theory going on that's been proven, at least in lab rats right now. And what happens is the higher the fat in the diet, the body begins to break down these free fatty acids, and there's a specific protein, even these free fatty acids, called, let's just see, I want to make sure I quote it correctly. I believe it's BCL10. Let me make sure I get it for you. It is BCL10. Okay, very interesting. It literally begins to multiply and affect the liver and muscle cells specifically, within 3 hours. And it is called intramyocellular lipids. What this means is that the greater the amount of fat in the diet, the fat begins to accumulate in the actual cells themselves. I was taught this over a decade ago when I studied bioregulatory medicine, and I studied cell membrane dynamics. So cell membrane dynamics, just a really quick one on this, is that basically there are soft fats and there are hard fats in the cell. So think of all of your cells have what's called a bilipid membrane. So it's like 2 layers of fat. Think of it as like almost like Swiss cheese. And there's only some ways that can get in. The hard fat doesn't allow it in, and the softer fat, will. So we're talking about like sterols, and then we're talking about more like polyunsaturated fats, which is why you need both, believe it or not. You just don't want oxidized polyunsaturated fats. But I digress. That's another show. So what happens is this: the insulin receptors on the outside of those cells can get blocked by these intramyocellular lipids. That means that the fat can be the part that's blocking it, and then when sugar enters the bloodstream, it can't get in because insulin is no longer able to open that door. Because think about it, there's a key where there's a keyhole that you put your key in to unlock your door. Well, think about it if there was no keyhole. Think about it if someone put gum or shoved putty into the keyhole. You wouldn't be able to put the key in. And that's what these intracellular or intramyocellular lipids seem to be doing, which seems to be proven out in the real world as well. Because when people go on a high-fat diet, low carbohydrate, what happens initially? Their blood sugar does fall. There's no doubt about it. And okay, that does happen because I see it play out in my clinic. Remember, I have a clinical practice. I see these things play out. But it's interesting because those people over time become actually more insulin resistant, meaning like they can never eat carbohydrates, because when they do, they get a massive spike in blood sugar. The blood sugar has a difficult time coming down, and they gain weight really rapidly. And so when you look at this, you say, well, this is a problem. And this high-fat diet is more like akin to conventional medicine, where you put someone on statins for high cholesterol instead of figuring out why the person has high cholesterol. So this doesn't mean you need to all of a sudden change everything that you're doing and then all of a sudden eat a high carbohydrate diet, because that could be dangerous as well. Because if your body's already insulin resistant, we need to work you up to it. So if you follow, again, you can work with any integrative health practitioner in the world, all right? Any integrative health practitioner in the world, or your naturopathic doctor, someone that specializes in this. But there's too many naturopathic doctors and too many medical doctors that hop on the bandwagon of keto. You have to understand is that you can use keto for very specific medical-based reasons, and you can use keto in terms of a cyclical-based pattern. But long-term keto is a disaster for the body. It's not how the human body was meant to work, and you can prove it out in small studies and all these things, and I get it, and I would use it in certain instances, and believe it or not, I do for a 21-day, whether it's our functional medicine detox that we do or our Fatlocity program, but then we teach people how to add back in low glycemic fruit. And then once low glycemic fruit is working, then we work up to things like purple sweet potatoes or Japanese yams or these types of things that are excellent for the body. We don't even need to do grains, right? We can just do what is easy to access, which is, again, fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables. That's where we're starting, and then we're starting to add and work our up. And that's how you help people get healthy, because remember, you can't have type 2 diabetes, and you can't have high fasting glucose levels if your body's healthy. So we need to stop focusing on weight loss. We need to stop focusing on all these quick fixes and biohacks, and instead look at how the body maintains what's called dynamic equilibrium. Again, the traditional naturopaths talked about this for years, and no one in Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, any form of natural medicine put someone on an extremely high-fat diet, especially for an extended period of time. It just wasn't done, and probably shouldn't be done to this day unless you are under the care of a specific physician where you're working on something like a brain tumor or something specific that you need to be on that type of diet. So again, I just wanted to present this to you today. I'm going to link up a lot of research at stephencabral.com/2028. It doesn't mean that I don't recommend a low carbohydrate diet for a certain period of time. We do. We do it for 21 days, sometimes 28. That's it. And then we start to do some reverse dieting where we add those carbs back in and we build the tolerance back up to the body. Okay. So I believe in everything. You have to understand that. But my number one priority is people, not some type of profit or promotion of some program. Okay. So what we do is we help people rebalance their body. That's really what it's all about. So hopefully this was helpful. More to come for sure. For all the details on show notes and links, head on over to stephencabral.com/2028. Take care, everyone. Have an amazing day. And of course, let me know your thought. I'd love to hear from you in the comments.